Well, so good morning, everyone. We're really excited to have you guys join in the first ever webinar held by Amrita-Seattle. My name is Amish Dave. I'm a physician here in Seattle, in Washington State in the United States, and also chair of the Public Health Committee for our county, for King County Medical Society. Today, we have a really distinguished group of panelists who are joining us from all corners of the globe, from Bengaluru, from Kolkata, and from Seattle. And we're excited to hear their perspectives about what's been happening with relief in the setting of Cyclone Amphan. For those of you guys who don't know, Cyclone Amphan hit the coast of Bangladesh and Bengal, including the states of West Bengal and Odisha on May 22nd, 2020. And in the setting of the current global COVID-19 pandemic, it has been quite a challenge to help many of the communities that have been affected by the cyclone. We're here today to tell you a bit more about a wonderful organization, Amrita-Seattle, that's been working on the ground there in Bengal, and also here locally, or locally for me in Seattle. I think we're going to start today with first a brief video to tell you a little bit more about the work, about what's been happening in Bengal in the setting of Cyclone Amphan. And then after that, we'll move on to a chance to be able to speak with the CEO of Amrita-Seattle, Ms. Sharmila Pal, and then we'll move on to a discussion with the panelists. So what we were just seeing were scenes of a lot of devastation that's occurred in the setting of Cyclone Amphan hitting the coast of West Bengal and also Odisha and Bangladesh on May 22nd. And okay, and today we're joined by a distinguished group of panelists to help us to learn more about what's been happening in the setting of that cyclone. I wanted to introduce today the lead visionary for today's panel, Ms. Sharmila Pal. So Ms. Pal is the CEO of Amrita-Seattle, and before becoming the chief executive officer of this wonderful nonprofit, she was the program officer for the organization, traveling to some of the most distant rural areas in India, including in Ladakh and in the Sunderbans area. She's also a seasoned globetrotter, and I didn't know this about her, but she holds 2 bachelor's degrees in chemistry and oceanography from the University of Washington, and has spent as much as 256 days at sea as a research voyager. As well as holding a master's in marine chemistry from the University of South Carolina and a master's in nonprofit leadership and management from the University of Pennsylvania. Ms. Pal, it's really nice to be able to talk with you this morning.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your vision in Amrita-Seattle, and really how did you decide to become involved in setting up schools in Bengal in the first place, and what have you guys been doing differently for students and community members?
So initially, my parents were in the forefront of laying the bricks and foundations of Amrita-Seattle, both in the US and in the field in India. I was still in school wrapping up my master's, and but I always remained up to date on Amrita-Seattle's initiatives and developments. But as I drew close to the completion of my dissertation, I felt that some piece was missing in the puzzle of life. And I wanted to apply my skills and strength to do work that served communities and people directly, and especially who were truly at the world's ends and had no access to basic resources. So when I graduated, I decided to just kind of take off and walk the Indian Himalayas by myself and find life's meaning. I did some intense trekking in the mountain passes, went to the extreme borders of India in the Tibetan plateau, like pretty much right on the India-Chinese borders, and lived in nomadic villages that are really unknown to the world, and intimately saw the beauty of nature and the harsh realities of life. And it was in the middle of this fierce beauty and power of the Himalayas that I saw how vulnerable children were due to lack of resources and basic necessities. And after pretty much a pursuit of 4 years, I realized that selfless service is the meaning of life. In 2014, I joined Amrita and as the program officer, and moved to one of India's most isolated places in the Himalayas, Ladakh, and began Amrita's chapter there from West Bengal. We were really proud to say that in a short span of 4 to 5 years, we constructed about 10 children's libraries, implemented high quality reading programs at each of our sites to take on more children. We still run daily after school tutorial programs, free meal programs at 5 deep rural locations that are really difficult to access. We facilitate multiple health camps where at times the only access to these villages is by trekking over 5,000 meter high mountain passes for days, or crossing multiple rivers on dinghy boats. One medical camp we did was we trekked for 11 hours and we reached the camp and all the villagers were waiting for us. It was evening and we did the camp till I think 11 in the night, and then because the early morning they had to go back to their fields. So it's really intense work and it's physically demanding, but the need is endless and at a massive scale. Plenty of times we felt lonely, we felt depressed while doing the work. It's hard, it's extremely challenging, it's deeply human, deeply organic, but it's in these moments like this we remind ourselves that, you know, our slogan is live to serve. And I think that's what makes us different from other orgs. It's our deep commitment to the selfless ideals of live to serve and to transform, truly transform a child's life. It's this philosophy that has gained, for the last 10 years, this has gained deep trust from the local community. We have worked with our beneficiaries for over a decade, and they truly understand and trust that, like other NGOs and nonprofits in Amrita-Seattle, is not here to do one-off interventions and leave, but rather they're here with the mission of bringing long-lasting change and true transformation in disadvantaged communities. So while we do focus on breadth and doing programs and trying to always reach more communities, more people, you know, I think the overall, in our core, we believe and respect that to bring true change, you got to go depth, you know.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about, in the setting of the cyclone Amphan that's now hit in May, the coast of Bengal, and really affected a lot of your programs. Tell me a little bit about what's happened to your programming down in Bengal, and how do you guys plan to rebuild, or what do you need to rebuild?
Yeah, so Cyclone Amphan pretty much went through Sunderbans, Bashirhat, those areas in Bengal that have been our core program areas. Sunderbans was where Amrita-Seattle kind of was born. So, you know, our first priority is, of course, doing relief work. We started relief since the COVID months, actually, and then Amphan hit. Right now, as the relief work continues, after that's kind of settled down, our first priority is to do rebuild for our current students and their families who have lost their houses or suffered heavy damages. Followed by that is what's needed is rehabilitation. So a few plans for rehab for self-sustaining are providing sewing machines to women and raw materials so that they can take up making essential critical PPE items and assembling PPE kits like face masks and all. Sanitary napkin manufacturing is also in really high demand. Providing microloans to start their own businesses, like tailoring businesses, or build or rebuild their little grocery stores. So like establishing tea stalls, fruit and veggie stores, quickie marts. Also, another great option is hand carts or pedal cycling vehicles to vend daily food materials. This is really helpful for people, especially in this pandemic situation, because they can buy their daily necessities at individual doorstep. Couple of larger projects we are intensely thinking about with other that we need to take up with partner organizations is the desalinations of ponds and fields, especially in Sunderbans, where we had the saline waters inundate the agricultural fields. A replanting of mangroves is really critical, and these have been heavily destroyed and damaged by Amphan. And of course, reviving education. So making a lot of the libraries in other parts of Sunderbans have been destroyed. Community clubs, organizations, they all need assistance to bring children up to speed with the loss of educational infrastructure that has happened.
So tell me a little bit about how has it been going so far in raising these funds, and what type of support do you see yourself needing?
Yeah, so we're planning to do a relief and rebuild and rehab combined with about 60K. We've raised about 20. We're hoping to raise another 40 with everyone's support.
And so a lot of amazing work that you guys can do, and a lot of work that needs to be done, from replanting mangrove forests to supporting libraries and schools in Bengal, and supporting the educational programs. Thank you all for all the audience who are joining us. I know it's early here in Seattle and a little bit later in other parts of the United States and in India. And so we're really grateful for those of you guys who are joining the first ever live webinar by Amrita-Seattle. We've been talking with CEO Sharmila Pal this morning about the amazing work that she's been doing for much of her life in Ladakh and in Bengal, and a lot of work that needs to be done still in the setting of Cyclone Amphan hitting the coast of Bengal. I think Amrita-Seattle does so many wonderful types of work, and you saw a video earlier this morning on the work in Bengal, but we're going to move to another area of Bengal and show another brief video as people are continuing to join both our live Facebook stream as well as joining our Zoom video link. So we'll turn over to the work that Amrita-Seattle's been doing at a blind school in Kolkata and a video on that.
Namaskar. Vishwajit Ghosh, Principal of Ramakrishna Mission Blind Boys Academy, Narendrapur, Kolkata, as well as Secretary, the Society for the Welfare of the Blind, would like to convey our heartfelt thanks to all the members of Amrita-Seattle, USA. Amrita-Seattle, USA is associated with us for more than 1 decade. They have been serving the people of India, especially in Bengal, meritorious students, needy meritorious students, inhabitants of Sundarban area, inhabitants of 24 Pargana South, and also visually impaired people of the Society for the Welfare of the Blind, as well as the students of Ramakrishna Mission Blind Boys Academy, Narendrapur, for last several years. Their contribution is really wonderful, and recently in the COVID situation and also in the cyclone affected Sundarban area, they are doing tremendous service by providing food materials and other things to cyclone affected people. And also Amrita-Seattle decided to help visually impaired adults who have become jobless or economically totally, not in a position to earn anything because of the lockdown situation, and they are helping these people in the Sundarban area. And in Ramakrishna Mission Blind Boys Academy, some of our students have been sponsored by the members of Amrita-Seattle. In our concept formation department also, sometimes they organize workshop to disseminate the knowledge of science among the visually impaired children. So in various ways, Amrita-Seattle is doing tremendous job in West Bengal, in and around Kolkata, and I hope that this type of services will continue in the coming days. And I thank all the members of the Amrita-Seattle for extending their cooperation to this work. Thank you.
So I think Amrita-Seattle, we just found its biggest ever fan. That was a lovely video, really talking about the work that's being done on education in Bengal. I wanted, as the moderator of today's session, to then move on to our panel discussion that's going to be occurring. And I want the audience to know that there is question and answer, and we're going to have time to be able to take your questions from at home or wherever you guys are located. So on the bottom of your Zoom function, there is a question and answer, a Q&A tab where you feel free to type in questions. We will be taking your questions at the end of the panel discussion and happy to address it. You can ask your question to any individual panelist or to the group at large. and I'm happy to gather those questions and ask them to the panelists. I wanted to start first with Mr. Somnath Mukherji. Mr. Mukherji is the development coordinator for the Association for India's Development Aid, and he spends at least 3 months a year in India working directly with partners on the ground in central and eastern India. Since Cyclone Amphan in 2009, Mr. Mukherji has volunteered with aid and really been working on so many different projects, from reclaiming land and working with farmers in the Sunderbans, helping to organize sustainable organic agriculture. And in the last over 11 years, his work has really meant that aid has been able to reach out to over 25,000 farmers and help farmers to do everything from selling organic produce to Kolkata to supporting their families. And while in the United States, Mr. Mukherji spends a lot of time mobilizing volunteers and helping them to connect to the ground to issues in India. Mr. Mukherji, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Amish.
So I wanted to ask you some deep questions today and start with, you have a ton of experience working on the ground at the grassroots level in rural Bengal. Can you tell us a little bit, can you describe what the situation is like on the ground right now since Cyclone Amphan hit the Bengal coast in May of this year? And, when people are in India, people in the United States, when they're looking at what's going on, those images in the video that we showed earlier about cyclone damage in Bengal, what can they do to help right now?
Yeah, so as you know, Amphan was a super cyclone which has not been seen in like 100 years, and we had started working, as you mentioned, after Ayla in 2009. But this time the intensity of the cyclone was much more. The wind velocities were much higher than Ayla. But there was a little bit of luck that how the wind interacts with the timing of the tides in Sundarban determines how much flooding happens. And this time it was off just by about 30 minutes. If the eye of the storm had hit 30 minutes later, we would have seen massive flooding in Sundarban. So
wow.
Thousands and thousands of people were saved because of this, timing off. I was on the phone with our partners at that time as the eye of the storm was passing, and it was devastating. So when we talk about destruction, of course, people know about roads being destroyed, power lines being destroyed. But from a people's point of view, the major destruction comes in form of destruction of homes, inundation of agricultural land by saline water, breaching of embankments. Those of you who are familiar, the only way people can live on the islands in Sundarban is because they are encircled by earthen embankments. If there is a breach in that embankment, water gets in. So that is a major damage that brings in saline water into the land. And as Sharmila had pointed out, a lot of the ponds get filled with saline water. That's a huge destruction because people depend on the ponds to bathe, to clean dishes, irrigate, and all of that. And on top of that, there was a huge destruction. And if we shouldn't forget, this was the second major storm in 6 months. In November 2009, Sundarban was hit by Cyclone Bulbul, which downed thousands of trees. And then Amphan came and downed the remaining ones. So huge destruction in trees. So that is the kind of destruction we are seeing. People rebuilding homes, trying to reclaim land for agriculture, repairing embankments, trying to remove trees that have fallen on power lines and homes. So that is a picture of what is going on right now in terms of destruction. And what was the second question, Amish, that you wanted me to respond to?
Yeah, so I was asking, in terms of how are nonprofit organizations and NGOs now working together or separately to improve the situation on the ground right now?
Right, right. So let me respond from my experience, maybe not to speak for everyone. There are many groups who are working in Sundarbans, and from our experience on working, after ILA in 2009 and leading up to Amphan in this intervening 11 years. We were able to quickly organize ourselves along with the partners and divide our work into 3 phases. The first phase, obviously, what Sharmila also referred to, relief, right? There is dearth of food, there is dearth of water, homes, roofs are blown away. So there is a need for tarpaulin, food, water, some medicine, sanitary napkins, some clothes and such. So that was the first phase of work that goes as relief work. The second and the medium-term phase, we engaged in dewatering the ponds that had collected saline water. So we used diesel pumps to throw that water out, so that when the monsoon comes, these ponds are able to recapture the rainwater. Then there was repairing of the breached embankments. It takes a lot of manual labor to repair those embankments, and a lot of these experiences we had from ILA. So we support this Food for Work program, where people who are working, we support them by either cooked meal or ration. And this time, as you know, this was a double whammy with the lockdown continuing and all the physical distancing rules that there are, and running some community kitchens. That was the second and medium phase. And in the longer term, which has already started, one of our main goals is to rejuvenate agriculture, which is the main livelihood. And right now, migration is not an option for people to survive. All the migrants are back in the villages. There is an enormous dearth of livelihood. So, we work with the farmers with giving seeds, reclaiming the salinated land. There are various very, very low-cost techniques that we work with the farmers. So that is a huge work, and this work might go on for another decade, right? So, and we are prepared for it because we work in terms of real solidarity, and real solidarity has to be unconditional. Real solidarity cannot say, okay, I will work in the summer and not in the winter, or I will work with these people and not that. So we are committed to staying there, working with them for the however long it takes, and then we have launched into about planting more than 1 million trees on the islands, various islands together. 1 to 1.5 million trees we will with the community, and these are all community efforts, not top down. And then regrowing mangroves, which are a bulwark against water surges around the island. So that is the long-term plans we have.
So really a lot of amazing work that you guys are doing on the ground, and it sounds like work that's going to be continuing for a long time and needs a lot of support from people at home if they're watching this today. So we're talking with Mr. Mukherji, who's a hero on the ground over there, and we have a really wonderful distinguished panel who's joining us today. So I wanted to turn next to Ms. Rumela Ganguly, and also, go with another amazing biography. So Ms. Ganguly is the founder for Seattle Theaterwala, and she has a real passion for theater. She's been actively working with the stage for more than 12 years, and has been involved with multiple renowned Bengali and Hindi theater groups in the Seattle, Washington, United States region, and also been involved in performing and adapting for different performances, including Yoni Ki Baat in 2013 and 2014 in Seattle. She co-founded Seattle Theaterwala in 2014 and loves both acting as well as directing. She has made her independent directorial debut in 2015 with the Bengali musical. She has been a long-term friend to Amrita-Seattle and has traveled extensively with them, including in rural West Bengal and Ladakh, and really has supported multiple students, especially vulnerable girls, to pursue higher education in private schools, and also engaged with multiple expeditions and mountaineering institutions. So Ms. Ganguly, it's really a pleasure to have you here with us today. Are you joining us from Seattle?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Amish, and hello to my fellow panelists. It's definitely an honor to be here and talk about the work of Amrita-Seattle.
Well, so you've now worked with Amrita-Seattle both locally and globally for almost a decade. I want to learn more about your experiences in rural India working with Amrita-Seattle. What got you motivated to get involved, and what's been your journey with this organization so far?
So I think I have been associated with Amrita-Seattle since 2010, and that is pretty much the inception of Amrita in Seattle. So Sujit Pal and his wife, they have been part of my life literally since that time. Me and my husband, we've been very involved in every one of their projects. I've had the pleasure of Sharmila to Sunderbans, and the experience is definitely one in a lifetime. How I got pulled into it, maybe it's one of those times in your lives when you get a call to try and serve people. But all I can say is that this journey has been really, really amazing. It's life-changing for sure for me, and I'm hoping the little bit of work that I could put in minimal will, even if it doesn't impact so many lives, because it's such a short involvement, I'm just hoping that I can tell the viewers and at least influence some of you to join their projects. That is a huge gain for all of us. So to give you an idea, we went, at least I went to 2 villages in Sunderbans. It's Tipligeri and Lakshman. So what I saw was, we went to these primary schools. I was part of a medical camp. We had a group of young doctors and students from medical colleges go with us. They are, still newly minted into the medical life with aspirations of the world and help the underprivileged, which they did admirably. When a young fresh graduate goes out there in the world, how much promise that individual has to give to the world. This was definitely I see the so-called boys and girls from towns and cities, how they go about and the basic simplicity of the villagers, the honesty, the earnesty, the hope in their eyes. Those are some things that you come back after sessions. Those kids that the medical camp, they arranged for the primary schools to, we set up these medical camps for the weekend, basically. And the children or the average treat about 200. And Sharmila, please feel free to join in and correct me if the numbers don't tally. It's about 210 to 230 people per year that they see on a regular basis. Children range, the age range is from 6 years to about 77 years. Unfortunately, life expectancy is short, and due to malnutrition and in those places. So what we have seen is on an average, about 195 children per year are treated in these camps. It's really heartbreaking to see the amount of malnourished kids, and they range from malnutrition to horrible dental hygiene issues to ladies with all sorts of gynecological problems. And Seattle, through workshops, through reaching out to people, is actually trying to help these ladies and these women and these children with just basic needs, with basic nutrition. Amrita-Seattle had, they have started a combat malnutrition program with the and reaching out to these remote areas in Sunderbans and different parts of West Bengal by providing them with the basic kits for children. So, yeah.
So thank you. That's, thank you for providing us that personal insight. And I mean, what a wonderful thing that you were able to go to see what's going on in this rural area of Bengal that a lot of people don't know about or necessarily travel to. And thank you for your advocacy, Ms. Ganguly, today. We really appreciate it. I wanted to remind people at home that there's the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. If you have questions for the panelists, we will have time to take those questions. So we are seeing the questions. We'll make sure that we get to all of them. But I'm going to move on now to another one of our very distinguished panelists, Mr. Dipankar Roy, who is joining us from Kolkata in India. Mr. Roy is a painter who was awarded the Goosey Peace Prize in 2006, and after completing his higher studies from the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh, Scotland, he served in the Red Cross for 12 years. His paintings have been exhibited all over the world, and he's been a regional advisor in Eastern India of Yuva Unstoppable. He's taken multiple initiatives towards COVID-19 relief and rehabilitation in the Sunderbans following Cyclone Amphan affecting the area. And he's currently the UNESCO Center for Peace Coordinator for India and the President for International Action Arts India. Mr. Roy, it's a real pleasure to have you with us today. I think you still might be muted.
Yeah.
Well, so I was saying,
thank you. I actually wanted to join you all from my workplace, but unfortunately, I had to suffer a blood pressure problem that was a fluctuation, which has yesterday night, it was pretty bad. So pardon me if I'm too casual, and yeah, I feel this is an honor of being part of the first webinar of Amrita-Seattle.
Well, we're very honored to have you today. I wanted to ask you a little bit through your work and what you're seeing in Bengal. Can you tell us a little bit about what types of devastation you're seeing in the area after Cyclone Amphan? What's been moving you and affecting you?
See, I tell you, the first thing which has affected us here, I mean the United Nations, and we are part of one of the branch of UN, which is UNESCO Center for Peace. I represent US Federation in India. Sundarban, it is a part of World Heritage Site. And why? Because it is one of the biggest gift of environment from Bengal to the world. We, after Amphan, we felt that what has destroyed Sundarban is the very essence of Sundarban. The mangroves were destroyed, lakhs of trees and plants has gone haywire, which ultimately affects the world environment as a whole, because it contributes a lot. So what we have seen is the devastation on the forest, the devastation which affected the livelihood of people staying there. And it happened in such a time when the world was suffering from COVID. We had lakhs of migrant laborers from Sundarban who were coming back to Sundarban, to their home. And while they are on their way back, they could face such a devastating storm, and which has uprooted lakhs of their home, their livelihood. So this is where we took a particular call. I wanted to actually, Amish, to make it short because I had to finish it up fast and then I had to go back to my sick bed. We wanted to rebuild the mangrove, and we took a target of planting 1 crore mangrove plants in and around Sundarban area, so that the world and its environment gets the prized possession which they lost from Bengal. So that is a big challenge where we had placed an appeal to all concerned throughout the world to contribute. And in this journey, I found hundreds of great minds like Amrita-Seattle. When we saw, initially they were, we saw them serving the people out there. And then we felt that if we could partner with any of their work, it will be a pleasure. UNESCO has its own support teams for this kind of activities. And I must appreciate, I must congratulate Amrita-Seattle for extending life to people who has lost their life. And I'm looking forward to, with my team in India, we will extend whatever support and contribution that we could do to their good work. I tell you, I will take 1 more minute. I was touched by their work for the blind people, mainly the kids. It reminds me, in 2006, if I'm not wrong, I was in Mumbai and I took the blind children's from this blind home at Worli to see a brilliant movie. And when I spoke to Ad Labs to host it for them, they first asked me that you are showing a movie to a blind group of kids. I said yes. And it was wonderful when I found them enjoying the movie, which is Lage Raho Munna Bhai. And after we finished the screening, there was a huge lot of media presence there, but they don't leave any chance of making stories. But here the story was for all good reasons, because they asked that what did you got from the story? They were almost 90% close to the story when they narrated that what they have heard, and they placed their own colors to it. So it was great. Amrita-Seattle and its team. I must congratulate Sharmila to put up this show, to bring us in. I was not sure yesterday midnight that I'll be able to catch it. The only thing is the Woodlands Hospital, they refused to take me in because Calcutta, most of the hospitals are COVID affected. So I could today be part of you. And I'm sorry, Amish, I will not be able to take any questions from you.
Understood.
But
yeah.
look forward, and look forward.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Roy, for joining us today. We are generally so grateful. I'm going to move on and welcome Mr. Amoghavarsha, who's a filmmaker and the CEO of Mudskipper. Mr. Amoghavarsha is an award-winning filmmaker as well as a wildlife photographer from Bengaluru in Karnataka. His work has been shown by National Geographic and the BBC. He's won multiple awards, including the Impact Docs Award of Merit and the Australia-India Youth Dialogue Alumni Grant in 2015. His work has been showcased in the 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris in the presence of many world leaders. And very recently, he also addressed the United Nations headquarters in New York City, where his film Wild Karnataka was screened. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Mr. Amoghavarsha.
Thank you, Amish. Glad to be joined by all the panelists, especially people who know definitely a lot more about Sunderbans than I could even imagine. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to ask you some tough questions today, but given your background and your passion for the environment, so climate change and other environmental pressures like deforestation and mangrove depletion are really impacting a lot of the ethnic communities in the Sunderbans and next generation. I'm curious, from your experience as an environmentalist, as someone passionate about India, what kinds of practical skills, education, advocacy should really be integrated into children's curriculum? And what are some of the outside forces that can be utilized to protect the land and the traditions in areas like the Sunderbans and elsewhere in India?
So I think overall, I feel that the education has to be more global. I've often seen in my own backyard in Karnataka that the education which, we think that the people around the forest need education. I think it's the people in the cities that need a lot more education. And I think it's also that kind of building a deep sense of empathy to understand what happens on the ground in most of these remote regions, because we are also sort of disconnected from reality. And unfortunately, we filmmakers and media people are also to blame because we show one side of the story. Sometimes it's the pretty side of the story, not the hardcore, hard-hitting, truth. So I think overall there needs to be a fundamental change in communicating the truth of what happens there. And to give you an example, right, I've seen media having its impact on grassroots level very directly. You look at plastic ban in India, right? It's purely like a media fueled campaign, which eventually impacted policy changes, and then of course grassroots. So I think education, especially for kids, because children are definitely a lot better at absorbing all this information and also being able to do something about it. And from that point, if we sort of increase this to a global fabric of awareness and consciousness, I think it can definitely deliver a lot more results at a policy level, because I think policies have a huge role to play, because governments have the kind of mechanism, the kind of funding, the kind of reach that a lot of us can only dream of. So I think in that aspect, that would be one direction. And the second point of your question about how do we make sure that these cultures survive? How do we make sure that these tribes or indigenous people have sort of their kind of knowledge, which has been passed on from generation to generation, is also kept. I personally feel that it is a choice that needs to be given to most of these people as to how they want to live, where they want to live. Because I've seen in my own areas of work where a lot of people have been asked to stay where they are and say, no, you guys have to stay in the forest. No, you can't come to the city. No, I don't think we are the people to make any of those choices. Today, everyone wants access to internet. Everyone wants access to water, clean water, electricity. And knowing how tough the terrain is in Sunderbans, it's impossible to take all of these facilities into the Sunderbans. It's ecologically devastating. At the same time, it's impossible. I mean, even with the greatest of technologies, it's sort of impossible. So most forest areas and hard to reach areas across India, the government has started giving people options to relocate on a voluntary basis. So if you want to come to a more well-connected place with better job opportunities, electricity, internet. So the government has been offering, and it has been successful to quite a bit in some of the tiger reserves across India. And I think that kind of option, I would say, should be given to everyone universally. The other example, we'll just take about 30 seconds, is the island nation of Kiribati, which I was fortunate to visit, which will be the first country to go underwater in our times and due to climate change. So they have bought a large swatch of land in Fiji and have given people option to voluntarily relocate to these areas. So I think there's a lot to learn by looking at these examples across the world. And my bottom line would be to give people the choice and give them the options to live the way they want.
And as a follow-up question related to these conflicts that people are facing with the environment, you're the director of Wild Karnataka. You have a strong passion for animals, and in the Sunderbans area, there have been a lot of man-tiger interactions that haven't gone so well for the men or maybe for the tigers themselves. I'm curious about, what type of education needs to occur on the ground for students related to living in a sustainable and safe way with the wildlife around them.
That's a very good question, because we've done tons of research, especially on man-animal, we like to call it interactions before it turns into conflict.
Right.
And a new word that's being coined in the conservation circles to sort of minimize the kind of bad PR that animals and people both get. And in that context, we've done a lot of research about man and tiger interactions, both in Sunderbans and in Madhya Pradesh and in Maharashtra. And what the research and data shows is that the number of tigers are definitely increasing in India. May not be the kind of numbers that are obviously projected, but they're definitely on the rise. And the forest areas that they have are not sufficient. So the number of conflicts or interactions are only going to go higher as the years progress. Now, it's a multi-stage approach, and this is not a problem that can be solved in a jiffy. And the fundamental thing, like you said, is education. Right now, unfortunately, we have a lot of armchair conservationists across the world who are mostly on Facebook. And when one tiger is shot, right, and they say, no, you can't shoot a tiger. But the life loss of villagers is not something that people definitely understand. I've been to these places and people have lost their children, their husbands, their wives to tigers. And you can never, ever, and I'm telling you this as a wildlifer, and I love wildlife more than I love people, but I tell this from my own personal experience and what I feel, that you can never ever say that the human life is lesser than an animal's or anything like that at all. It only fuels a lot more negative sort of emotions between both humans and animals. And I think we should be empathetic towards the kind of people who live close to these areas, right? And the first step, of course, is education, like you said. We're putting in processes and policies as to how do you deal when an animal comes into the area? What is the standard operating procedures? So having gone through hundreds of failed missions and failed operations, now the government is slowly waking up to realizing what are the right measures to put in place. But again, it's pretty much the same point, Amish, that I keep always making, that the deep level of empathy that everyone needs to have about all these incidences, I think, is the key. Because it cannot be man versus animal or animal versus man. You have to take a very sort of how do I say, a more common middle ground, where if there is a tiger that needs to be killed because there's a village that's harmed, I think that's the right decision to do. As unpopular as it sounds.
Well, thank you so much for providing us a lot of this nuance and context related to things that in Seattle we don't necessarily have to think about on a daily basis about man-tiger conflict. And we really appreciate your time from Bengaluru today, Mr. Amoghavarsha. I wanted to, we're going to move on and ask more panelists more questions today. I just wanted to say, for those of you guys who are watching on our live Zoom chat or on our live Facebook feed, we're talking today with people who have been very passionate in India and the United States on supporting programming through the Amrita-Seattle nonprofit group. If you feel that you're very moved by today and by what people are talking about, please feel free to donate to the work that Amrita-Seattle is doing in Seattle, as well as across Bengal and Ladakh as well. You'll see in the Zoom webinar chat links to donate on their website, as well as you can also Google Amrita-Seattle and be taken to their main page and be able to donate there as well. I know that this organization is doing wonderful work, as you're hearing today, and they're definitely wouldn't mind some support for the work that they're doing, especially with regard to Cyclone Amphan. We're going to move on to Mr. Pradip Sikdar to ask him some more questions. Do we have you there from Kolkata, Mr. Sikdar?
Yeah, I'm from Kolkata, yeah.
Well, wonderful. So Mr. Sikdar is a talented musician and a computer expert. He has been Amrita-Seattle's computer teacher for visually disabled students residing at the Blind Boys home in suburban Kolkata in West Bengal. And he is a very talented sound engineer, composer, keyboardist, and voiceover artist who's been highly decorated by the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award Project for Youth Empowerment in Social Service and Expedition. He was a student at the reputed Narendrapur Blind Boys Academy in West Bengal, and is also a full-time teacher at the BT Road Government-spawned high school as well. Thank you so much for joining us today from Kolkata.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great opportunity for me as well.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Amrita-Seattle's impact in empowering visually disabled and impaired youth from low-income backgrounds. Can you tell us about the work that they're doing in Kolkata?
Okay, it's a lot to tell, but I'll keep it short. The first thing is, most of the blind persons are also financially handicapped. That is a known thing, because a person becomes blind due to various reasons, and most of them is like the mother may have not been served proper food, proper medication, etc., etc. And also on the top of that, every stages of the life, a blind person need extra financial support. Just to give you an example, a student who is not blind, studying in standard 10, He requires books to read, fine. Blind students studying in class 10 also requires books to read. Also, readers to read the books because all books are not there in Braille, fine. Now, device to record the books and also softwares, assistive technologies to operate the devices. So it's a chain of costs which involves in the life of any blind students, blind persons, in all the occasion I'm telling you. And it was in 2007 when I first met Amrita-Seattle. I, along with 7 of my friends, we were there in a blind bus home in Sharafuri, runs by the Society for the Welfare of the Blind. And in that time, we were the first batch, and we even didn't have the money to, get food every day. I'm not even talking about the nutritious food. I'm talking about the food. And even Amrita-Seattle was a very tiny little NGO in that time. Still, from their own pockets, they helped us so much. They provided the fees of our cook. They provided the expenses of our readers, and they encouraged us so much in that time. I can believe, and there it is not stopped. When even I was not there in Sharafuli home, they have started the nutritious food program where all the blind students, around 15, maybe more than 15 blind students were there in the Sharafuli home. They were provided like fish for 3 days in a week, eggs for 3 days in a week, 1 day chicken, etc., etc. And not only that, to empower them the most, as you know, that we blind person depends very much on the technology. So they have decided, okay, let's establish this, let's find a computer training center. And they founded a computer training center there. And I was the lead of that training center. So yeah, and those who have got the training, they are now doing best in their life. And just to be very frank and full respect, I'm telling you, I believe that most of you who have joined here today may have started virtual meetings, maybe first time in their life in this, lockdown situation. Yeah, that's true. But we have started in 2017. Mr. Shujit Paul, he called me and said, okay, Pradip, so you cannot go there every day. So do one thing, set up an online session. So they have provided the webcam, they have provided the hardwares to run a internet broadband, and we started the online tuition in that period of time. And that motivated so much. Those who have learned from me in that period of time, they are now doing their best. And I am a pillar in front of you. I'm telling you that I am teaching students now every day in this situation online all over the world. I have students from South Africa. I have students from Australia, Bangladesh, and a lot of part of the world, and as well as India. Fine. So, these are something, very much empowering to them, to us. And, not only in the education sector, I'm just giving you an example. I was struggling to be a sound engineer. And again, I'm telling you, there is added cost in every area. I had to purchase softwares, assistive softwares to, become a sound engineer. So I was struggling very much. And one day I got a project. You may have heard about Egiye Bangla project. They are in West Bengal. And I got opportunity to compose a song for them from a third-party sources. But in that time, I didn't have any microphone in my hand. So I called Shujit and asked, okay, can you just purchase a microphone for me? And I will pay you later. I cannot pay you right now, but I'll pay you later. Because I thought that there is no, any institution, NGO, anyone who will provide support in employment area. They provide supports in education, fine. They provide books, that's fine. That is also needed. But when you are finishing your education and you are going in the mainstream, you need some support. And believe me, I can show you that I am having this piece of microphone in my hand. Shujit immediately, took the plunge and gave me this microphone, and obviously for free. They didn't charge me for that. And I have so many experience to say, but the time is limited. The last thing which I'll obviously mention, and that is the, unique in Amrita-Seattle. Because being a visually impaired, I have met a lot of NGOs, and they have, most of them helped us. I'm really grateful to them, I'm telling you. But Amrita-Seattle tries to help people, tries to empower people without hurting the sentiments. It's a real big thing. We received lots of helps, from others, but we felt so much embarrassed. It was hurting our dignities, that they are showing so much of sympathies and all of this, all of business. There's nothing wrong with the business, in my point of view, but the sympathy, the overall things, we are kind of bound to take the help from them because we had to take, but it was really hurting our dignities. And I'm there with Amrita-Seattle, as I have told earlier, that I am there from 2007, and I have not even found a single event, whether it is with us, with the visually impaired, whether it is anything else, anyone else, they have never ever touched the sentiments with others, and that is the fundamental things should be for anybody, for any institution, for any NGO, in my personal experience. Yeah, that's all I can say right now, and I'm really grateful. I'm even not grateful, because grateful is not something that describes them properly. So yeah, I'm thankful to them. Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sikdar, for your really passionate words and support for Amrita-Seattle and everything you do. I'm going to move on to our last, but certainly not our least panelist today, Ms. Ray Lakshman. Ms. Lakshman is a local Seattle organizer and a student at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. She is such a deeply compassionate and passionate person who's a change maker and a humanitarian. And she's volunteered with Amrita-Seattle in both the United States and in rural India. In Seattle, she's been working for years with Amrita-Seattle on its meal services program for unsheltered, at-risk youth and young adults. And then in India, she traveled in 2018 to Ladakh in the high Himalayas and really worked on designing and leading an intense science, technology, engineering, and mathematics camp for middle school students in a town called Sakti in Ladakh. Ms. Lakshman, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here amongst some amazing people. I've been learning a lot so far, so very humbling.
Me too. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you to work with this amazing nonprofit Amrita-Seattle in rural Ladakh? What were your experiences teaching like?
Right. So before I started with Amrita-Seattle, I was looking at a lot of other organizations in the Seattle area to do work in India, because I felt like a lot of the work I was doing here, I needed to I felt like I had an obligation to do work in India to expand my reach, to understand especially with climate change, the global impact it has. And a lot of the work I was looking at online was very volunteerism based, which is a term that means it's volunteering, but it's really just tourism, right? You go abroad and you work with communities, but it's not very much based. It's a very colonial imperialist thing that a lot of Americans go and do in other countries, that it's actually more damaging than it is helpful to those communities. So when I talked to Sharmila ji about all of this, she kind of expressed that this is not a touristy thing. It's going to Ladakh is going to be very demanding. It's going to be, you have to acclimate, you have to train beforehand, you have to be able to adapt to the needs of the people you're working with, and you have to do a lot of research beforehand. So that to me was oh, this is something that's actually going to be very impactful. And so when I got to Ladakh, there was an acclimation period. You have to acclimate to the, to the different landscape, both physically and mentally. So that was really taxing. It's not an easy task to do that. And so that was the first part. But then moving forward, you go, it's very jarring how different the environment is. And the first thing you see is I was working in Sakti, but I first got to Leh. And in Leh, there was my mom had gone to Ladakh a couple years before, and so she'd show me these incredible pictures. And so when I went to Leh, a lot of what I was seeing was not necessarily what my mom saw. It was very jarring because of the influx of tourism after the Three Idiots movie. A lot of the economy was shifting from an agrarian economy to a tourism economy. And that had a lot of environmental impacts, a lot of litter, you know, like a shorter snow season, like ice caps melting, things like that. So it was incredibly visual. For the first time, I was seeing like one of the most isolated regions in the world being directly impacted by, you know, global capitalism and climate change and all of that. So that was really jarring. And it actually made a very big difference in how we were educating, like with STEM related stuff, the children. Like I came with, you know, a set of like plans. We came with all these kits. We came with circuit boards and, you know, like lab experiments and things like that. But I had to alter a lot of it as we were there because I had to make sure that I was, you know, adhering to the communitarian values of the people there. It's one thing to go there and just teach what I learned here in Seattle in my school, but I had to make the, you know, education relevant to them. So a lot of what we did was teaching about circuitry and electricity and like the physics behind that as it related to renewable geothermal energy that they use to light their homes and power their computers. So that was like the most important thing in Sakti was like learning that like this kind of global volunteer work has to be very based on communities, has to be very anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and very focused on the infrastructure that's there, that's focused on the autonomy and the agency of the people you're working with, asking the principal, what is it that you want me, what do you want from me? When you volunteer and serve, it has to be in coalition with the existing infrastructure and the existing needs and resources that are already there. And so that's one thing that Amrita-Seattle does incredibly well. And I know a lot of people have those concerns with volunteerism, and I can say that Amrita-Seattle is not that. It is purely volunteer work that's hard and gritty and is very taxing, but actually works very much in coalition with those communities.
And thank you for sharing your experiences out in Ladakh. Amrita-Seattle, the second word is Seattle, and they're also doing a lot of work with the homeless population out here in Seattle. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with Amrita-Seattle's homeless work too?
So that was actually how I first got involved with Amrita-Seattle. Amrita-Seattle, in relation with how I said the word coalition before with Ladakh, Amrita-Seattle does work in coalition with other organizations here. So for a little bit of background, I work in mutual aid and organizing here, especially with the Black Lives Matter protests and everything like that. And a big value system we have is that there should not be one organization doing all the work. That's all hands on deck. And I think Amrita-Seattle has a great relationship with that ideology. When I started working with Amrita-Seattle, they work with Roots Homeless Shelter. They have a shift system, so we do Saturday mornings and a couple other times a week. And then we do need-based, you know, based on like Thanksgiving meals and things like that all over the city and all over the King County area. And Amrita-Seattle specifically focuses on food and making, and when I say specifically focuses on that, it means making sure there's enough protein, making sure that there's different options for food, making sure that the people who are serving the food, when they're serving, that there isn't some sort of power structure, that there's empathy with the people that you're serving and like learning those skills and making sure that the people that, you know, we're eating, and to make sure that we're eating meals with the people that we're serving so that there's a, you know, human touch with that. And then the best thing about Amrita-Seattle is that like then they work with Roots Shelter, and Roots Shelter provides conflict de-escalators and other things like that. So it's a very holistic experience in terms of that. So when I started working with Amrita-Seattle, I was just in the kitchen. I was just cooking, and eventually every week I'd go. I started getting more involved with eating meals with the folks at the homeless shelter. It was a youth homeless shelter, and there was a lot of jarring visuals. I remember I brought my friend, and my friend recognized someone who they went to school with who was homeless and was at the shelter. So there was a lot of jarring experiences. And so I think I kind of got the bearings from Amrita-Seattle, from working with the food, to actually now that it kind of inspired me to get more involved. So now I'm a conflict de-escalator, and we're working on building the organizations I'm working with are working on building safe injection sites in that area, specifically because of the education and the experience that Amrita-Seattle gave me in that area has motivated me to kind of go deep in my work.
So it sounds like you're really embodying Amrita-Seattle's motto of live to serve, and really, it's been a process for you. Working in Seattle, living in Ladakh, teaching there. I mean, just really wonderful work, Ray. Thank you for sharing your experiences today.
It's an honor being here, and I've learned so much from Amrita-Seattle and from Sharmila ji, so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on that.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists. We have a number of questions, and so I want to be able to ask a few of those this morning and also keep us on schedule. But I also wanted to just remind anyone who's tuning in, both on live Facebook Live and then also on the Zoom live call, if you feel moved by some of the discussion today, please feel free to make a donation to Amrita-Seattle using the link on the page to donate, or you can Google Amrita-Seattle and donate to Cyclone Amphan relief and to the wonderful programs that they're doing. I wanted to ask my first question, or a question from the audience, to Mr. Mukherji, which is in the work that's being done in Bengal, especially with farmers, how are you building climate change resilience, especially and including in areas without a lot of rain and areas of drought?
Yeah. So see, the sustainable agriculture itself is a climate resilient form of agriculture, where you are not dependent on external chemicals, and it doesn't destroy the soil and the environment any further. But that is one thing. The other thing is the rebuilding of the mangroves around the island. Now I'm not talking about the forests themselves. There are about 100 islands in India, in the Indian part of Sundarbans, half of which are forested islands and half of which are inhabited islands. About 5 million people live in the Indian part of Sundarbans. And in this inhabited islands, there is a strip of mangroves that goes around the island. So that provides some kind of a bulwark against storm surges. And we are trying to rebuild that. And people who are deeply connected to the grassroots will know that Sundarbans is under threat from climate change, but it is also under threat from human induced activities. And one such extremely destructive activity is building fisheries at the cost by cutting mangroves. And these are all moneyed people, either from Kolkata or elsewhere, who invest a lot of money, and most of these are illegal, of course. So we try to raise awareness about that as well. Rebuilding the mangroves, replanting, rejuvenating the tree cover on the islands, and also thinking of homes which are more storm resilient, which have a little more power to withstand the storm. And right now, the newer homes are not able to do that. So, but we have not gone too far on that route yet, but that's something we are looking at.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that answer, Mr. Mukherji. A question for Ms. Pal, Sharmila Pal. With the COVID-19 pandemic and the protocols in place right now across India, what are you doing to keep your education work alive and well in Ladakh and in Bengal?
Yeah, it's really challenging. In places, it's most challenging where our current programs are based off of local public schools, because the public school system is closed. So we have moved to remote operations, virtual learning modes. We've been providing kids who have, especially in Ladakh, where the hostels have, the residential homes have closed and the boarding facilities have shut down. The kids have had to go back to either their families or relatives or to the families where they used to do domestic work. So providing them with technology, with mobile phones, we've had to buy laptops for students so that they can join their courses. But I think really the greatest difficulty is even if they get a text message from their teacher, like, hey, join your Zoom call, they don't know what to do with that. Parents don't know what to do with that, right? I mean, it takes us a while to figure out, technology, and also it's a struggle. I mean, the learning loss that kids are going to have is immense. We're trying our best to make sure that that the kids can access the technology, they can join their classes. All the teachers have multiple phone numbers to reach us. They can reach me, like in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. I've gotten calls from teachers in Ladakh like, hey, your student is not joining the class, what's going on? And I've had to like call and be like, okay, let's do a screen share, let's press here, press there. It's not easy, but I think we're trying our best. The learning loss is going to be hard, and that's the reality. And we're still navigating in uncharted waters, and trying to come up with solutions every day until schools open. Our libraries and all have moved to like operating in batches. So like group A comes today, group B comes the other day. So trying to keep that going, but it's the situation is changing every day, the COVID situation, so that requires adaptation on our part almost every day. So.
Thank you so much. And then one final question for Mr. Amoghavarsha, which is, how do donors, especially small donors, people at home, when they're making their donations, how do they make it less about themselves and more about the local communities that really need to sustain living with dignity?
I think I would say that the focus more than, I think I know what Uma is worried about. I think more focus than that is actually how do you build capacity? Because I think eventually, if we reach a place where donations are not required, I know it's a utopian idea, but if building capacity is the focus, then what happens is that it induces the donor money and all the resources into the ecosystem and not independently and individually to people. So it solves both issues, I would say. One is, of course, directly pointing, resources or money at one individual. So, the dignity and all those questions just go out of the window. And the second is, like I said, building capacity at an ecosystem level, making sure, like there's some sort of, I actually very recently saw something pretty cool online where there's a community which is making bamboo water bottles. I'm trying to get some of them here, and they're doing this while this whole COVID is happening and everyone's locked down. And given trade is so international now, it's all online. I think such activities of building the ecosystem would go a really long distance.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's so important for us all to think about how we can really sustain our environment and support local communities in our giving. I want to thank all of our panelists today for their time. We have a little bit more of our program today, and we're very blessed to have a musical performance by Mr. Pradip Sikdar. I think we're going to cue over to him in Kolkata to give us a live presentation.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So yeah, this is my first ever keyboard solo, you can say. I play in a group. So I'm trying to play something. It's almost my own composition. I'm saying almost because I have added the ingredients of 2 songs, one Bengali songs by Shreya Ghoshal and one very well-known in English song. I am not mentioning the name. Okay, let's try something. Yeah. And you'll see me sideways because I have a very small room and my instrument is placed in a different ways.
was
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pradip.
that was wonderful. It's so nice, especially in the midst of this pandemic, to have live music. And thank you so much, Mr. Sikdar, for
Thank you.
playing
Thank you
for
very
us
much.
all over the globe from Kolkata today.
Thank you.
I wanted to again thank all of our viewers for joining us today. You've heard from some really wonderful panelists in Kolkata and Bengaluru, in Seattle, who've been talking about their experiences working with an amazing nonprofit, Amrita-Seattle, whose real mission of Live to Serve has really been lived by so many different people today. You've heard about work that they've been doing in supporting blind children and running a blind school in Kolkata, to work they've been doing on the environment and education in the Sunderbans area, as well as work that they've been doing in Seattle on homelessness and feeding young adults, as well as work that's been done on education in Ladakh with so many wonderful people. If you feel inspired to be able to donate something, even if it's a small amount, I know that Amrita-Seattle would gratefully use it to fund and support so many of their different programs that you've heard about today. So feel free to please Google their website, Amrita-Seattle, and donate that way. Or feel free to make a donation using the link that you might see in the Zoom webinar chat. There's no deadline for making a donation. You can donate anytime. And certainly if you find what you've heard about meaningful today, please feel free to share it with family, with friends, with colleagues. I can think of few organizations that are trying to do so much for so many different people in such a threadbare manner. The donation that you make really makes a big impact on so many other people's lives. And so feel free to make a donation today. We're going to close out today and do something which is rare in Indian broadcasting, which is try to end as much on time as possible. We're going to close out with a video about Amrita-Seattle's mission and their work called Live to Serve. Please feel free to watch it. And then thank you all for joining us today, all of our panelists. If you have further questions, feel free to email Amrita-Seattle using their website. They are very responsive and very eager to be able to answer any questions that you might have about other programs, or if you want to volunteer your time, whether it's in Seattle or India. Best wishes to everyone with the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope everyone is safe wherever you are right now.
A great river always begins somewhere. Often it starts as a tiny spring in the mountains and then joins hands with other tributaries to grow as it finally plunges into the sea. So, when people ask me why Amrita, the essential answer is that we reacted to a set of problems by focusing on what could be done. As it turned out, the idea sprang from my roots, merged with many other sources of knowledge and action to form a confluence that grew bigger than I would ever have imagined. Amrita-Seattle breaks the cycle of poverty by creating pathways for vulnerable children living in some of the most isolated rural regions of India and Nepal. Our modules of education, healthcare, and advocacy guides children from elementary to employment. We work in the island villages that are tucked deep within the Sunderbans mangrove forests in West Bengal and in remote isolated Himalayan villages in Ladakh and Nepal. We refuse to leave no children behind. In rural isolated India, due to poor infrastructure and abysmal resources, families very often have to give away one or more child to a well-off family in the cities. The child lives with a foster family and serves as a labor and is completely dependent on them. School takes a low priority and they remain as a source of cheap labor for the rest of their life, unable to become self-reliant and break the cycle of poverty.
I am Tufan Barik, a medical internee. After a few days, I will be a full-fledged physician. From my childhood, it was a dream to become a doctor, but it was challenging for me for various reasons. Amrita-Seattle helped me during my critical situation. So now I am ready to give back. Now I am proudly leading the Amrita-Seattle's rural health camp. Thank you all the members of Amrita-Seattle family.
I grew up in a highly dysfunctional family in West Bengal. Later, with my single working mother who had no sleep in her eyes. To support of Amrita-Seattle, I completed my school, colleges and university. Now, I am a teacher in many colleges in West Bengal. In my free time, I do work for Amrita-Seattle. Thank you, Amrita-Seattle and all members of Amrita-Seattle for changing my life.
Our impact model drives deep into the communities we work with. We focus on the number of lives changed and relationships built versus the number of children reached. I cannot change a population of 1.3 billion, but together we can create a model solution that can be a blueprint for rural community transformation. Thank you so much for your support.
So thank you all again for joining in today from across the world to our first ever webinar for Amrita-Seattle, focused on the development work that it's been doing in so many different areas. But especially we got a chance today to hear from people on the ground in India who've really been working on disaster relief and have been so passionate indeed that you know, people are even coming from being ill to speak today. If you feel moved by some of the discussion today, again, please feel free to make a donation. And otherwise, we wish everyone health and security and safety right now in the midst of the pandemic. Thank you again for the wonderful work that CEO Sharmila Pal has been doing and her family for so many years to support so many underserved communities, both in Seattle and then in South Asia as well. So thank you for tuning in today.
Thank you so much, Amish, and thank you, Amrita-Seattle, for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.